In our last lecture, we talked a little bit about Aristotle and what Aristotle called ethos, pathos, and logos. Well, today we want to talk a little bit more about the ethos. And let's do a little review. Ethos, Aristotle said, was the character and the credibility of the speaker. And then pathos was the emotions that you use to evoke the audience to do one thing or another. And then logos was the reasoning to back up the statements. So with ethos, this is the credibility, the character that the speaker possesses. And in our lecture, it's going to be about the ethics. Ethics is being taught in a lot of different subjects: business, communication, science, and we see a lot of people that are breaking the ethical rules. And Aristotle knew this. He knew that if the person giving the speech had certain motives, then it was up to the listener to find out what the motives were. And he also wanted the speaker to make sure that they had good and pure and just motives. So let's talk a little bit about this. Whenever you're doing research, one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is we avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is rampant in high schools and in colleges. And one thing that has made research a lot easier is, of course, the internet. Back in the old days, whenever you had to do research for a paper, you would have to actually go to a library, get a library card, and use the Dewey Decimal System, try to find the book. And then if you found the book or books, then you would type the paper up on a manual typewriter. Now we have the internet, so we can just Google, and there is our information that we're wanting. The problem is, it's a lot easier to plagiarize. Plagiarism is actually stealing. Whenever you think of plagiarism, it's no different than stealing a book or a paper from someone, because you're actually stealing their ideas. And here again, this is what Aristotle thought that was important when it came to the credibility of the speaker. Even Plato, he said that public speakers should be truthful and devoted to the good of society, what is in their heart. Well, for example, Hitler was a great communicator. He was a good public speaker, but we know what was in his heart. He wasn't that good of a character. He wanted to see evil carried out through his own people. And Jesus mentioned in Matthew, Sermon on the Mount, that what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart and defiles a person. So whatever we talk about and the actions we do, this reveals our character. And as a speaker, we want to have good character. Even if we have a good paper or a good speech that we're working on, if we're stealing it from someone else, well, we've shown our character. And there's 3 different types of plagiarisms that we need to look at. The first one is global plagiarism. This is where you steal the entire speech. You can Google some types of reports, a report on volcanoes, and there's a report that you could either buy or you can copy from the internet. If you do the entire speech or the entire report and you don't give it credibility or don't reveal the source, then this is called global plagiarism. The second one's patchwork plagiarism. If you steal ideas or language from a few sources and then you pass them on as your own. If you let's say for example you had 6 sources and you only gave credit for 2 and the other 4 you told the audience that was your idea. Okay, it's a little bit better, I guess, than global plagiarism, but it's still plagiarism. And the last one is incremental plagiarism. If failing to give credit on a particular part of a speech. And we see this especially in quotations. If you give a quote, then you need to find out who that quote was from. If you're unsure and you think it might be from one or two different sources, well then tell the audience of those one or two different sources. The main thing with incremental plagiarism is you don't want to take someone else's quote and tell the audience that it is your own. So plagiarism, we see this more often now because of the internet, but on the other side, on the teacher's side, on your professor's side, it's easy to find out if the subject or the article, the speech or the paper was plagiarized. If you're doing writing assignments, whenever you turn your writing assignment in, there's a lot of different programs that the teachers can use where we can put it through the program and we can find out exactly where that information came from, what website, who quoted it, and it'll even give us a percentage. It'll say 25% of this paper has been plagiarized, or 60% of the paper has been plagiarized. If it's 25% and it's plagiarized, usually what the teachers look at is they see what was plagiarized and did you give that person credit. If you gave that person credit, then it's not plagiarism. So technology is great on the student side, but you need to be aware that the teachers now have a lot of gadgets that they can use to try to combat plagiarism. Remember, on any speech or any paper that you have to do in college, you want it to be your original work, your own thoughts. One of the ways we can avoid plagiarism is by, number one, looking at good journals. Peer-reviewed journals, this is what you can find at your college library, and you can go to your college library's website. And you can look through ERIC files or EBSCO files. And you can look at journals that have been reviewed by peers. What they mean by this is if it's an education journal, then an educator has written a journal and the peers of that educator, other educators, have looked it over and have commented on it and maybe made some adjustments. This peer-reviewed journals is in every type of field of study that there are. And then the neat thing is this is where our libraries at colleges and universities, they've gathered all the information for us. Now we just have to seek the information. So if you're going to use a peer-reviewed journal, you need to give that part of your speech credit. You can do this in an outline form, or sometimes if you're giving a speech, you can say, well, according to the Journal of Education, 38% of students say blah, blah, blah. Also using books. Books have some great quotes. If you use these books, make sure that you tell the audience in an outline or even in a book. You can say, according to The Art of Communication by Mr. Lucas, he suggests, and then you go on with your source. Websites are great, but you want to stay away from blogs and some websites, because you and I both know you can put anything up on the internet. Many websites that are scholarly based, it's kind of like a peer-reviewed journal. If somebody puts something up on the website, then a peer will look at it and either agree or correct that. Wikipedia is great, but Wikipedia also has a lot of errors. I know in a lot of my classes I won't allow students to use Wikipedia because there's still so many errors in it. There's just not enough employees working for Wikipedia to correct all the errors. Wikipedia is nice if you want to know something about the subject, but you're not going to know in depth or all of the information as you would on a scholarly website or a peer-reviewed journal. And of course newspapers is, again, you'd want to give the author's name of the newspaper, if possible, the date of the newspaper, and of course the title of the newspaper. In given speeches, it's the speech maker, it's their solemn responsibility they have the obligation to their listeners to be prepared. So also, while you're giving a speech, don't just jump up there and try to do it ad lib. You want to do your research. If not, you're wasting the audience's time. Whatever you're giving the speech on, for that particular moment, you are the expert. And also, while you're doing research, play devil's advocate. If you're trying to persuade the audience on something, you ought to look at the other side as well. And whenever you're doing your research, you need to look at the other side. It's not ethical if you just look at one side and not the other. That's kind of what politicians do, don't they? You don't want to juggle statistics, and you don't want to take a quote out of context or even misrepresent sources. The whole word plagiarism, it comes from the Latin word for kidnapper. So in other words, this should be your own work. And remember, even if you paraphrase, you need to cite the sources. If you put that thought into your own words, change 2 or 3 words, it has to be your own sources. Those programs I was telling you about that your professors, your teachers can use, those programs, they catch the paraphrases as well. So make sure that you give those sources some citation. And listening. Not only is this good for interpersonal communication, but as an audience member. We'll talk about in the future how important eye contact is for the speaker. But eye contact is also important for the listener. You want to make eye contact with the speaker. That's just common courtesy. You want to avoid judging that speaker, because whoever is up there, even if they're given some type of information, a lot of it could be false, but there's probably something that you can get out of it. Whenever I've listened to speakers and I know that the speakers are given false information, that's my way of looking into their minds to see how they set up arguments. Why do they feel the way they do? Well, it's probably because of some type of worldview. But I've always at least told myself, any type of speech that I hear, any type of program that I go to, surely there's something that I can learn. And there are some kinds of speeches that are not protected under the First Amendment. You can't make a threat against the president or go into a theater and yell fire. The problem is, on the other view, it's been argued that some ideas are so dangerous or so misguided or even offensive that society has a duty to suppress those ideas. I tend to disagree with that. If free speech is free, then it should be free to everyone. One of the things that we're seeing now in our society is a lot of college campuses and university campuses, they are trying to limit quote-unquote free speech. There's a lot of conservatives and Christians that are not allowed to speak on college campuses because the people that are in the administration don't want to hear what they say. I disagree with that, because free speech should be free to everyone, and you should be able to hear both sides of an argument. So with this section, we want to look at the ethics. We want to make sure that your character is in the right place, because whenever you get in front of an audience and you talk about a subject, whether we realize this or not, our character is being shown to the audience. So let's try to be as honest with ourselves and with our audience as possible.